John Kiriakou, the world knows your name. Why? Why does the world know your name?
I can give you two answers. One, I'm proud to say that I blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program in a nationally televised interview with ABC News. The second reason is I blew the whistle a long time ago, and just in the past 18 months, I seem to have hit some sort of YouTube algorithm sweet spot, and all of a sudden, my message is getting out there.
And you went to prison for blowing the whistle.
I did, and I would do it again tomorrow. I really would. You know, I was giving an interview to the BBC the day after I got out of prison. They were the first outlet to ask for an interview. And so I gladly gave it to them. And the interviewer said, kind of perturbedly, "You're not showing any remorse or contrition?" And I said, "No, I'm not remorseful. I'm not contrite. I would do it again. I would let them send me to prison again because it was the right thing to do."
And you were a spy in the CIA?
Yeah, I was quite an accomplished spy in the CIA. I spent 15 years in the CIA. The first half of my career was in analysis, and I got bored, frankly. And so I made an unusual, at the time, change to counterterrorism operations. And then I was the chief of CIA counterterrorism operations in Pakistan after the 9/11 attacks.
And if I'd never heard about the CIA before, and I had never heard about your role in the CIA before, and I was a 16-year-old.
Right.
How would you explain to me what you did there, what your role was, and what the CIA is?
Sure. The CIA is an intelligence service whose job it is, at its most basic level, to recruit spies to steal secrets and to analyze those secrets so that the policymakers can make the best informed policy. After 9/11, we were expecting an attack, to use Osama bin Laden's words, that would dwarf 9/11. And so my job was to infiltrate Al-Qaeda by recruiting members of Al-Qaeda to tell us when and where that next attack was going to come so that we could disrupt it, we could kill or capture the leadership, and destroy the organization.
And give me a range of the things that you did during your time in the CIA, just for a very top-line range of the types of things you worked on.
Oh, sure. As an analyst, it was actually quite straightforward. We would write for the president, the vice president, the secretaries of state and defense, and the national security advisor.
And who were the presidents during that time?
When I started, it was George H.W. Bush, the father. And then it was Bill Clinton, then George W. Bush. There are several different publications. There's the President's Daily Brief, which is the most important. I covered Iraq the entire time that I was in analysis, from well before most Americans had ever heard of Iraq. I was told actually that it was a training account because nothing ever happened there, nothing ever changed, and then Iraq invaded Kuwait. The next day, I got to the office early. I was 25 years old, 26 years old. And my boss said, "Don't take your jacket off. We're going to the White House." I had never been to the White House before, except as a tourist. And so we got in a car, went to the White House. We're ushered into the Oval Office. It's the president, the vice president, the national security advisor, the director of the CIA, my boss, and me. And then we all sit down. The president tells us, "Sit down." We sit down and the president says, "Well, now what do we do?" And everybody turns and looks at me. And it took me a second. And I said, yes. I said, "Mr. President, as you know, Iraqi troops crossed the border at 2:00 this morning. The royal family has run away to Saudi Arabia. They've named a new occupation governor, et cetera, et cetera. Do we know who that is?" I said, "Yes, sir." I gave him the name. And I said, "Actually, he's the co-founder of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine." The vice president shouts, "Jesus Christ." And then the president says, "Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. We'll take it from here." And I remember saying to myself, my friends would never believe in 1,000 years what I was doing right now. They wouldn't even believe me if I told them. That's what an analyst does. When I switched to operations, again, the job was very straightforward. It was to recruit spies to steal secrets. But then if you're involved in counterterrorism operations, there are a lot of extras that you have to be trained in. So you go through the normal spy training. This is how you ingratiate yourself. It's something called the asset acquisition cycle. Spot, assess, develop, recruit. I meet you at a cocktail party. You seem like a nice guy. I introduce myself. I ask, so what do you do for a living? Well, if you tell me you manage a shoe store, I'm going to say, well, it was very nice meeting you. And I'm going to go on to the next guy. But if you tell me you work at the port, you work in the Ministry of Defense, you work in the Chinese embassy, I'm going to invite you to lunch. I've spotted you, I've assessed you, and my assessment is I'd like to get to know you. Then I begin to develop you. I'll give you an example. I was in Pakistan. I got a tip that Al-Qaeda, a group of mid-level Al-Qaeda fighters, was meeting every single day in a coffee shop at 10 o'clock in the morning. My Arabic was absolutely flawless at the time. And so I had a bushy beard that I grew for operational reasons.
Can I hear some of your Arabic?
Yeah. Tasharaf b'mariftak. It's nice to meet you. Or Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, Malik Yumadin, Rahman ar-Rahim. So I bought an Arabic newspaper and I went to the coffee shop and I just sat there. And sure enough, at 10 o'clock, the four of them came in. One of them looked at me and I looked at him, and that was it. We made eye contact. I did that for a week. The second week, I was there drinking my coffee, sitting with my Arabic newspaper, and the one who had looked at me the week before, he nodded. So I nodded back. That was it. No communication otherwise. The third week, I'm a regular now. He recognizes me. So he says to me, Salaam alaikum. I said, Walaikum assalam. May peace be upon you. And I say, and upon you peace. One day, he came in alone. And I said, Tafaddal, please have a seat. Sit with me. No sense in you sitting alone and me sitting alone. So he sat down. We started talking. And I asked him how long he had been in Pakistan. He said, I've been here for 5 years. I was in Afghanistan. I was making jihad against the Americans. And I said, that must have been hell on earth. He said, he said that the bombing of Tora Bora was hideous. That was the word that he used. It was hideous. And I said, and what about your family? How's your family? He said, my wife and son and daughter are in Cairo. I've never met my son. He was born just after I left to make jihad. I said, I'm so sorry. And he said, yes, I'm lonely and I want to go home. And we continued this relationship. And finally, I said to him, let me take you to dinner. Let's get out of the coffee shop. The truth was I didn't want one of his friends to walk in and see us. So we went to a restaurant for dinner. And I said, listen, there's something that I haven't been truthful with you about. I'm not Lebanese. And I said, and actually, I'm American. Are you okay with that? And he says, I think so. I said, well, actually, I'm a CIA officer. And he says, okay. So he didn't run screaming from the room or pull a gun or anything. And he said, why do you want me? Why do you want to talk to me? I said, actually, you have access to something that I want. It was very specific. And I told him what it was. And he says, and what will you do for me? And I said, anything your heart desires. And he said, I want to go home. I said, I can do that.
You wanted information, presumably.
I wanted information, very specific information.
Which you can't share.
No, I'll go right back to prison. So we got him a passport. I bought him a first-class ticket. And I took him to the airport, gave him some cash to get himself started again. And I said, before you go, I have to ask you, why did you agree to give me this information? I mean, presumably I'm the enemy. And he said, I've been here 5 years, and you're the first person who ever asked me about my family. So I said, best of luck. Never saw him again. That's the job.
I have to ask you, take me on the journey of you being a young man in West Pennsylvania
Right.
to becoming a spy. What happened? Because I'll be honest, I don't really know what my perception of spies is, but it's not you.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. See, because I kind of work under the radar.
So what's really interesting is there's so many once you learn about spies as a podcast, like, so if you go back a couple of years and someone had told me about spies, I wouldn't have believed them. I wouldn't have believed that these things actually happened.
Yeah.
You know, you
they
hear
happen
about people going undercover and going to other countries and getting secrets and all of these things. And it's not until you meet the people that said, yes, that's me, I used to do that, that you have this paradigm shift in your mind and you go, oh my God, what else might be going on?
Right.
Because I lived in this world probably up until the age of, 30 years old, where I kind of just assume things are what they are, like as I see them. And then, you start to discover that there's layers of secrecy, nations are against each other, they're doing all of these covert operations. And even like as a podcaster now, I have moments where I go, like, how do I know that you're not here to steal secrets from me?
Right.
So, what's funny? When I had Andrew Bustamante on the show, the comment sections are always the same. They're always like, once a CIA spy, always a CIA spy.
I hate when people say that.
It's like,
so intellectually lazy.
But I do wonder, and I go, okay, here's a super conspiracy theory. What if the CIA have made spies do really well in the YouTube algorithm so that all of us as long-form podcasters invite them on, and then they...
You know what? I would agree with that. I would have agreed with that a year ago because Andrew Bustamante has really made a handsome living out of selling his experience.
Yeah.
And he's on every podcast.
Yeah.
But I am the most anti-CIA, former CIA person that's out there.
But wouldn't that be the perfect CIA agent?
I mean, if I weren't constantly criticizing the CIA as an organization that's just out of control.
Do you think the CIA have a strategy for podcasters and for podcasting?
I think yes, now they do. It took them a little while to get current, but just like they over time developed a strategy with Hollywood, sure, they're developing a strategy with podcasters. It was only in the last 10 years that the CIA opened a branch within the Office of Public Affairs whose job it is solely to liaise with Hollywood studios. The FBI's been doing this since the 40s. And the goal is that everything that comes out of Hollywood should be pro-CIA. And, we end up with Zero Dark 30 and, The Recruit and the CIA, Argo. The CIA is always the hero in these movies.
If you were still at the CIA now, and your job was to infiltrate and use creators or podcasters as an asset for the CIA's objectives, how might you design that plan if we were just hypothesizing?
You would have to have a goal that would be specific enough that you could actually track the progress to it. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to pay this podcaster X amount of money and we're going to do something with the algorithm to make him vastly popular among men, 18 to 30, let's say. There's got to be more to it than that. It has to be a message. You've got to be able to get a specific, well-honed message out there. And the message can be anything. It could be, love the CIA, we're the good guys. It could be support the overthrow of the Iranian government. It could be, any criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu is anti-Semitism. It could be anything you want it to be. You just have to make sure that it's repeated enough. See, this was the danger with the torture program. This is one of the very important reasons that I went public when I did, because my colleagues, my superiors at the CIA kept repeating this lie over and over and over again that torture worked and that torture got us information that saved American lives. And that was just simply not true. It was a lie. Besides being illegal, immoral, unethical, it just wasn't true. And so I decided before we go down this road anymore, I'm going to go public.
So can you take me back then? We got a little bit sidetracked there, but
Sure.
John, how did you come to be a CIA spy?
When I was 9 years old, I told my parents that I wanted to be a spy when I grew up. It came time to apply for college, and I only applied at one university, George Washington University in Washington, because it was 2 blocks from the White House, and it was one of only 3 schools in America that offered a Middle Eastern Studies program. I was one of only 4 people in that brand new Middle Eastern Studies program. I stayed for a master's degree in legislative affairs with a focus on foreign policy analysis. I was taking a class in that program called The Psychology of Leadership. It was taught by an eminent psychiatrist named Dr. Gerald Post. And he gave us an assignment one day where we had to shadow our bosses. We had to just follow our bosses for a week.
Your bosses?
Yeah, I worked at a labor union called the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. And so we were just supposed to follow our boss around for a week and then write a psychological profile. I used dozens of, footnotes from psychology texts. And I ended up saying that he was a sociopath with psychopathic and possibly violent tendencies. And, I had these citations. I passed the paper in. Dr. Post gives it back to me a week later, gave me an A, and then he wrote, "Please see me after class." So I went up to him after the class and I said, "Dr. Post, you wanted to see me?" He says, "Come to my office." So we went down there, he closed the door, and he says, "Listen, I'm not really a professor here. I'm a CIA officer undercover as a professor here, and I'm looking for people who would fit into the CIA's culture. I think you would fit into the CIA's culture. Would you like to be a spy?" And I said, "Yes, I would." He picked up the phone and called a number, and he said, "Bob, this is Jerry. I've got a good one for you. Do you have some time?" And he said, "Sure." He writes an address on a scrap of paper, and he says, "Be at this address in 20 minutes. It was only 1 subway stop away. So I jumped on the metro. I went to Roslyn, Virginia, just across the river. I had to buzz to be let in, and a woman opens the door. She says, "Are you here for Bob?" And I said, "Yes." She says, "Come on in." I'm sitting there for a moment, and then this 6'6", 350-pound giant barrels out of his office, and he says, "John, Bob, how the hell are you? I want you to be at the George Washington University Medical School Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. We've got some tests for you." I said, "Okay." And then we shook hands, and I left. So Saturday morning, I went to the GW Medical School auditorium. There were 200 people there, and they handed us a test. My wife picked me up. She said, "How did you do?" I said, "I have no idea."
Does your wife at this point know that you're applying for the CIA?
Yes, and that was going to be pretty much the extent of what she ended up knowing. Because once I got in...
But you weren't allowed to tell her?
I was not allowed to tell her, no.
So you told her anyway?
Yeah. When I first applied, they said, "Listen, don't tell anybody because you may go under cover, you may go under deep cover, and we can't have people out there who know that you're a CIA officer."
Presumably the CIA are smart enough to be able to check if you've told her.
Yeah. And they ask you on the polygraph, "Did you tell her?"
Really?
And I said, "Yeah, I told her. She's my wife. What am I going to do?" But it got to the point where I'd get home from a day where, I broke into some guy's house and planted a camera on a bug, and I'd get home and she'd say, "How was your day?" I'd say, "Great." "What'd you do?" "Not a darn thing." And then my phone would ring at, midnight, and a guy would say, "The rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain." And I'd say, "Mares eat oats and does eat oats and little lambs eat ivy." And that means meet me at the yacht club parking lot in 3 hours. And then I'd leave. She would say, where are you going? It's midnight." "I got to work." So I'd leave. I'd do my meeting. I'd come home 6 o'clock in the morning, just in time to shower and shave and get dressed to go to work. And she would say, "What was her name?" And I remember this one terrible time. That's what she said to me. "What was her name?" The truth is, I had been sitting in a garbage dumpster waiting for a guy to drive by down the alley and throw a bag of documents in. and I stunk of garbage. And I said to her, do I seriously smell to you like I've been with a woman? Seriously. So we ended up getting a divorce.
So you do the assessment, presumably you get in, and then you do training?
He called me like 2 weeks later. Bob did. And he said, you blew the doors off those tests. I said, oh, great. Okay. So a month later, they summoned me to headquarters. And I was interviewed by the Office of Near Eastern Operations, the Office of Near Eastern Analysis, and the Office of Leadership Analysis. I was offered the analysis job on the Iraq desk.
And what is the sum total of the training you were given in the variety of different roles that you had? Like, how do they train a spy?
That's a good question. And the answer is vastly different depending on where you start your career. Okay. So because I started mine in analysis, the immediate training was in mastering the CIA's writing style. So the most important product that the CIA writes every day is the PDB, the President's Daily Brief.
And it tells the president what?
What you think he needs to know.
Okay.
So for example, when the Iraqis began moving to the Kuwaiti border, we had this big debate. Are they gonna cross the border? Yes or no? So I said, listen, why don't I call the American defense attaché in Baghdad? And I'll just ask him to drive down there and look and tell us what he sees. He drives down there, drives back, he calls me and he says, literally the entire Iraqi military is on its way to the Kuwaiti border. So we wrote a thing for the president saying Iraq is going to invade Kuwait and it's probably going to happen in the next 48 hours.
And when did the president see that particular briefing?
At 7 a.m. the next morning.
Okay. And is there ever situations where the president would get it in the middle of the night?
Yes. Yeah.
And be told in the middle of the night that?
Yes. There are these levels of immediacy. There's routine, which is like, who cares? And then there is priority, which means, I'll get to it sometime today. Then there's immediate, which means you should probably read it first. But then there's flash, which means, oh my God, something terrible just happened. You should probably wake the president. And then there's critic, which means they're coming over the embassy walls. We're at war. Wake up the president. Scramble the jets.
9/11.
9/11. Mm-hmm. That's a critic.